We talked about new users and their behaviors. Can the same be applied in just returning users too?
Yeah, sure. So like again on GA4, you can look at path models and you can look at attribution models. You can compare them, first click versus last click. So you can start to see and paint the picture once again. This is why a lot of brands, they may look, and I would challenge people watching this, go look at your GA. There's a strong chance when you look at the direct, it'll seem really high.
Yeah, it always
20,
does.
40, 60, 70%. And a lot of times that's nothing more than just a halo effect.
Welcome back to Chew On CRO, where we go deep into the CRO hacks and tips so that you don't have to. We started this special series with Ned, who formerly owned a company called Endrock and has some really special news to share today before we kick off the episode. So Ned, what's going on in your world?
Yeah, big stuff, right?
Yep.
So I had founded the agency, as you know, it came around in about 2019, and we had amazing growth, organic growth only. All of our client inbounds came from referral, existing client referrals. Never had sales, never had marketing, and 2023 was a huge year for us. A few larger agencies in the space took note of that. We had some table-side discussions with some of them as to what a potential acquisition or merger would look like. And we found a group that was just a perfect cultural fit. I mean, just an absolute powerhouse. I say that term literally and figuratively. They're called Power Digital in the space who took a keen interest. And I just immediately knew, having interacted with their team, the cultural fit was just, I mean, a 10 out of 10, which was the most important thing. So yeah, after months of due diligence and kind of going through it, excited to say that Endrock's been acquired. So we are now officially Power Digital. So I'm the Chief Growth Officer for Power Digital, and we are now a 700-person team, about 700 folks, and you know, with 13 different service offerings. So it's not just CRO and experimentation. Now, obviously, they have a strong SEO, paid media, email, content, influencer, and affiliate divisions, et cetera. But what's really exciting about it is, and we're going to talk specifically today about some really complex things, the abilities that we have with their data intelligence team, which is second to none. It's incredible. And they have some internal proprietary tools that we're just starting to absorb and use now, which are, I mean, like really take our game to the next level. The value we can bring to clients now to not only dissect where issues are, but help them accelerate growth is just so much further down the line than it was even before. And we were doing very well before, right? I mean, I really had a lot of pride in our ability to do that, but now we got a lot of firepower behind us now. So I'm super excited about it.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And it's, again, testament to what you've built very quickly and how many, you know, positive impacts you've made on businesses that are ranging from 7, 8, 9 figures and beyond. So, you know, with that theme, though, I think one reason we spun off this series is trying to go deeper into the talks of CRO and the talks of optimizing. And I think one big theme that has always stood out, especially with how you've approached the business, is it's not always what it seems. And I think we got to really build up a really cool case study for this episode, which is a brand that, you know, you have some spectacular data points on the surface, it may look like one thing, but behind the scenes, it's a completely different story. So let's start there. Give us some background on this.
Yeah, of course. So this is, in just kind of a little warning, this will get a little complex, but it really, and you said it well, will exemplify why it may look like one issue, but it's really disguised as another. So let's talk high level first. Like, how did we get to this point where the brand owners predominantly were looking in this case at their CMS's analytics, in this case is Shopify's analytics, which is an excellent place to start to kind of get your gears turning, to be like, something's wrong. Our AOV's dipping, our conversion rate's dipping, or something's going, like something is happening that's causing these otherwise outside of the normal bounds of normal fluctuation movement. So what I mean by that is you're always going to see oscillations, right? It's always going to be going by some variance, day over day, week over week, et cetera. So you don't want to get too obsessive about it. But when you start to see these systemic declines or these linear declines for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 8 weeks, et cetera, that's where questions need to be asked, right? So in this case, they took a look at it, and you can very specifically see, it's just kind of this blunt report, that conversion rate was way down. Okay, so the immediate reactions from that, and most groups look at that, is something's wrong with the site. paid media, which is usually one of the biggest drivers of traffic, right? For perspective, it's where most brands, even really huge brands, are spending the vast majority of their budget is faltering. Something's wrong. So you start seeing these hyper rotations going on in creative or different message structure testing or even value proposition testing or changes on the website, even getting into some cases, we talked about this before, making structural design changes as if that's the issue. Like for whatever reason, the design is stale now in people's eyes, which doesn't happen over like a month, right? That takes years for things like that to happen. But in this case, so they're kind of looking here. The reality is the problem was completely masked. So here's a couple things that I did. So I'm taking a look at it, and I'm looking at a lot of different data points. One of which is, obviously the per channel, the per source medium, the per default channel grouping setting to see where are we seeing lifts, where are we seeing dips. Also looking at device types, right? So trying to see, is there agnostic behavior or is it specific to one device type, et cetera? And then looking at different time variances as well. So in their case, they had particularly strong performance in terms of their first purchase unit economics for acquired customers from late-ish July until basically the middle of October. Then things started to falter a bit and they really started to decline, which, by the way, if you notice that time window, that in and of itself kind of raises a bizarre flag, because it's like, well, I thought Black Friday, Cyber Monday, November window, gift giving window is one of the biggest windows, and it is. So generally most brands start to see these upward ticks then, right? And this brand was kind of seeing the opposite. So that already is atypical and a bit of concern. But when you start to dip into it, it's like, okay, well, where is this coming from? Well, we generally look at users in two different subsegments. We'll look at new users and we'll look at repeat users, right? And by the way, a lot of people will mistake repeat users with repeat customers. When you're looking in GA4 and you see repeat metrics, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a repeat customer. That just means it's necessarily a repeat visit. Like you come to whatever site, you take a look at it, you leave, you come back later that day, you're part of the repeat category. But you can break this down further. So as an example, you can take a look at a new user segment, which are known new users, meaning from that device type they're coming in at, it's their first time ever visiting the site, versus people who have some sort of cohort behind them, like they've visited the site multiple times a month, their repeat visitation, whether they bought or not is at this point besides the point. So what I wanted to look at was specifically new users. And the interesting thing there is the data was really wacky looking. So as an example, we saw this hyper increase in the total new users, but this massive decrease in the sessions of new users, which is a very bizarre thing. You don't normally see that. So when you dig in deeper, then we start looking at first-time purchaser conversion rates. And specifically what I wanted to look at is the conversion rate of new users who bought on their first visit.
Got it.
That was up 18% higher, meaning in the last 2 weeks, their conversion rate there was 18% higher than even the beginning of November, which is like,
and that's on the first visit.
First visit, first session.
Got it.
So you're somewhere, you're on your phone, you see an Instagram ad, you're like, oh, that's interesting. You click on it, you go to the site. So not in app, but you go to the site and you're like, yeah, I like this. This makes sense. And you buy it, which is generally a small percentage of the composition of new users. However, it's a very particular and very important audience segment, because that's like your real conversion base right there is like first visit, first pitch, do they buy? Because there's no other exogenous variables. There's no emails interrupting it. There's no, hey, they're going to Amazon. There's no, they're reading third-party reviews. It's straight up what they're reading on the site. Does that convert? So that was up 18%. So that says a number of things. One, probably not a problem with the site. Because if you had an issue with the site, why would you be up almost 20% on your notoriously hardest to convert audience? Second thing that it says is the problem now has to do with this repeat audience. So then I took a look at the new customers, the new users who are buying on multi-session, down 70%.
Wow.
So how is it that we have a scenario where you've got new users bifurcated into bucket A and bucket B? Bucket A is up 20%, bucket B is down 70%. Dramatic. So then to validate this, we use, and this is kind of the moral of the whole presentation today, is when you're looking at Google Analytics and GA4, et cetera, you've got to utilize all the different metrics in there, because they tell you different elements of a broader story. So a lot of times people will look at just their average revenue per user. A lot of times they don't even look at that, but average revenue per user, average order value, and conversion rate. Very rarely do they break conversion rate down by like new versus returning or mobile versus desktop, et cetera. So it's like all these proverbial layers of the onion that you can pull back. You get deeper into the narrative of the story story on what's going on.
Right.
So in this case, come to look at it, you go back to the late July, August, and specifically September window, and the sessions per user for these new users was, I think, well over 2, right? Then you look at it in the last 7, 8 weeks, et cetera, and it was like 1.3. So using these metrics to, again, validate what we're seeing, which is, okay, this is starting to paint a picture. It's the new customers broken into repeat versus single visit, of which the former, right, the ones who are first visit are converting quite well. Okay, we can push that off to the side. And then we have the repeat visits, which are predominantly driven by things like email, CRM work, retargeting, or just their own natural, which is they'll leave the site, and we'll talk about this now, and go to a third-party site to see if they can get it cheaper, to read reviews, what have you. That audience is converting 70% lower. So now we start to ask questions.
Right.
And so now it's talking to the brand founders to be like, talk me through what was going on in July, what was going on in August, what was going on in September. Come to find out, they launched in Walmart in August. Okay,
Yep.
so that's, okay, got it. All right, so you launched in, how many? Nationwide. All right, so you have a huge Walmart presence. Interesting. What did the price structure look like? What's MAP look like, et cetera? Well, back then it was similar to the website. However, then one person on their team said, but I think it was in October, they dropped the price dramatically in Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
Sales in Walmart started to go up. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting? That's right when it coincides, when this first purchase unit economic inverts, like the whole curve inverts at that point.
Right.
But remember, not for all new users, only those who need multiple sessions to the site. So now you're already starting to see the storyline of what's happening. What were they doing? Classic behavior. And you see this with Amazon a lot, right? Which is people will come to the website and then they'll leave, and then they'll go to see if they can find that product on Amazon or some other third-party site, sometimes because they trust the shipping logistics and they know like Amazon will get it to them at a definitive timeline.
Right.
Other times because they think they're going to get it cheaper. So sure enough, you've got this cohort of users who are already doing this behavior, which is they're going to a third-party site because they say, I want that company's product. Yep. I'm just questioning if I should buy it from this medium.
Yep.
What do they care? I'm going to buy it anyways. And sure enough, because the price was considerably lower. So now you got to validate that. That's an interesting hypothesis. So now we go and we look at the funnel behavior and we say, well, where is the abandonment, right? So this was really interesting. So, and I have some of the data here. We'll be able to pull some of this up to show people. When you start to look at it and you say, well, show me new users specifically and mobile, because in this brand's case, it's predominantly mobile users. And you look at the homepage intrafunnel rate, past a collection page, move to PDP, add to cart rate, the cart to checkout rate, and the checkout to transaction rate, almost all of those metrics were above, on par, or within an acceptable variance of where they were back in August and September when metrics are really strong, except for one. PDP abandonment rate was up like 70 or 80%, which once again validates the hypothesis. So what are these people doing? They come to the website from paid media, they go into the product page, they say, that product I want, and they leave from the product page. So that data point helped validate this hypothesis that people were definitively leaving, not at the top of funnel where they're like, and am I even interested in this brand? It was at the product level.
Wow.
So people who abandon at the product level are most likely going to try to find the product somewhere else. And that's exactly what was going on. Now, in their case, they also happened to see the efforts around CRM and email, et cetera, had dramatically dipped. And so I asked the question, well, have there been any changes? Sure enough, in October, they moved to a different email service provider. They changed up their automations. They changed up cadence. And you know about this, right? They changed up the frequency, content of the emails. So to me, that probably wasn't the best effort. It probably actually underperformed. So when you combine the lower performance on the CRM and the repeat visitation efforts with this natural headwinds that they're flying against now, which is dealing with Walmart's lower pricing, you can see how it started to paint this new picture. But coming back full circle, had you just looked at that bare metric, for instance, on just Shopify, which said conversion rate are down, what would they potentially have done? Maybe had changed out a lot of the content on paid media that was converting well. So now they'd have a triple negative because they would have been attacking the very thing that was doing well, which was new user first visit conversion rate. That unit economic is some of the best it's ever been. So again, I know that's a long concept there, and I tried to synthesize that the best I could, but But the ethos of it, of course, is you've got to use a scalpel and keep asking questions and digging in and digging in. And you'll find these really interesting data points that'll validate that.
Right.
And then that starts to point to some of the answers.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, hearing this now, you know, from you a couple times, it just shows that it's not what it seems on multiple levels. It's not just what you see on the brand level, but even the analytic platforms you're using. Like, just what you're seeing on your initial dashboard is not enough.
Yeah.
Right. And so maybe if you can like take a step further there, which is like, let's just say I'm listening, I'm a founder, I'm listening to this episode, and you're telling me to dig in deeper. Where do I even go in somewhere like a GA4? Right. To dig in deeper on these different cohorts of returning new users versus new users that check out in, you know, instantly. How do you find some of these key metrics?
Yeah, sure. So it's there, right? I mean, you've got to learn how to utilize audiences. You have to learn how to use filtering as an example, where you can use secondary dimension on some reports to say, show me mobile only, or a new visitor only, or this audience only. And you could customize an audience to be a particular subset, which is like people who did a thing within a given window. And that thing could be like an event set or a conversion set, of which the event or conversion set could be something like, you know, made it to the PDP and abandoned at that step. So you can tell GA4 to highlight criteria of a type of behavior that you're trying to nail down on, and then from there you can then look at that overlaid on a bunch of different reports. Right now, it is harder on GA4 now with things like thresholding, et cetera. So that's all well and good and understand, but it's not even about the absolute numbers. It's just about following the ratios, because you start to see, again, some of these like really bizarre, atypical things like we were talking about. And you're like, how could that be? New users on one hand are doing well, but so not well at the same time. How is that possible? And it brings me back. There was a fascinating article. I forget who wrote it, but I believe it was called like the funnel is dead, or the funnel. I think it's the funnel is dead. Something like that. It came out years ago. And I might be butchering this a little bit in terms of who did it, but I believe Google got the permission of thousands of people, where they were basically like, we're gonna be like surveying everything you do. Like, give us permission to watch everything they do. And it was like real data collection, where like every website you went to, everything you interacted with, they tracked across I don't know how many thousands of people. And what they were trying to prove out, and again, it may not have been Google, I think it was, is the funnel real? And it turns out, not really.
Not really.
What people do is the funnel is actually like they come into your site and then they just go like this. And they all go in completely different directions, not only on your site, but on the internet. And not only just on the internet, sometimes in retail as well. You've heard of people sometimes who will go into a retailer or a Walmart or a Target, and then they will use their phone to evaluate a product. How do you measure that funnel? You know what I mean? Like, so the point is you've got to understand that it's not as simple as like new versus returning, mobile versus desktop. There are multiple strong subsets of each of those. And as we just discussed, what about people that buy on first visit versus multi-visit? Completely different psychologies, right? And by the way, that brand had almost proven this. They had ran, that I found out, a landing page test where they had brought in the Walmart logo and it lost. Meaning the AOVs and the conversion rate went down. So that again validates the hypothesis, which is your highest value consumers who are multi-visit, who are likely to have the highest units per transaction, that's why your AOV went down, when they saw the Walmart logo, said, and they went over to Walmart and bought it. So if you look at like, marketing efficiency ratios, probably over time, this all comes to the surface and it's good for the brand. But this is why looking at just like one singular metric, like just site conversion rate, can be extremely misleading sometimes.
It's crazy. I think it's a part of this like phenomenon of like how we're reading data is also because of how lazy new analytic dashboards have made founders. Like, again, love the Triple Whales and North Beams of the world. However, we are like married to these like not random, but these metrics called NCPA, right? New customer acquisition cost. And it's like, if you know this, you're dialed in. And it's like, but wait, even within that, the reason why it's an average is because you have a massive spectrum.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, what is causing the other parts of the spectrum?
Sure.
And there is no reason for people to dig into it.
Yeah.
Because everyone is just going after an average.
Yeah. Correct.
And I think when you're just aiming to learn and build your business around an average, you don't actually understand what levers to pull on the other spectrums of it.
Correct.
So I feel like we're all like just these robots that read what everyone else reads. And then when it actually comes to understand our customer base stuff, we're not doing that, digging deeper.
Right. And it's like, so let's unpack that. So it's like, well, our average is helpful. Should we use them? I call them C-suite dashboards, which is like CEO comes in the morning. They're like, look, I got 10 minutes in between my million meetings today. Tell me what's up. How are we doing? And it's right. That's fine. If the metrics are down, that should do nothing more than just spawn a conversation. That's it.
Yeah.
Not, hey, we're down. Go change the website.
Right.
Go put a new hero banner.
Go
up.
put new ads up.
Yeah. Let's launch a sale. No, it just is meant to say, let's have a conversation versus all looks good. Right? And once you start the conversation, it's nothing more than just that. You're just starting the gears to get turning to then say, let's dig in deeper and try to really understand what this is.
Such a good point.
And this is why you need folks on the team or groups who can help you with this, whether it's a freelancer, an agency, whomever, who are specialized and kind of love and are passionate about dissecting the problems.
Right.
Because, and this is another thing, is oftentimes if you get in there and start making changes, it might feel good that like you're making changes, much to the dismay that it like won't actually move the metric that you're looking at, in large part because you were focusing on A when over here B and C were really the problem. Case in point, the storyline we just shared, which is that was a bit, a bit more complex and a bit more intense than normally we would see. A lot of times it's an easier one than that, but it's a bigger brand and they've got a lot of brand equity built with a lot of customers, and so it's not just like magically the site stopped performing. That's not going to happen just like that. I mean, sure, always audit the site, make sure there isn't functionality broken or something like that. But in this case, it was, as you can see, really an exogenous variable that has caused that decline.
Yeah. And you know what? I feel like we hint at like wanting to understand this data because we'll make comments like, and we do this too internally, Ash and I. We'll be like, is the quality of the customers or traffic cheap today? Or is the quality bad, right? And it's just like, wait, it's more than that. It's you're looking at it because again, the overall average seems poorer than yesterday. And really what it is there is a deeper cohort that's behaving differently than this other piece. And I think if there's one big like piece that all founders need to do is just look at the composition of each number and understand what it actually comprised of instead of taking it at its face value and just saying this is my number and that's what I'm going to run with. And because I think it's also creating a pretty large imbalance of how smaller brands are trying to understand their business.
It's even harder with smaller brands. You get wild fluctuations.
And then you don't have statistical significance in certain
you don't,
things, right?
You don't. And a lot of times then you hear them say dramatic things like, I guess people just stop having interest in our product. And it's like, probably not. You know what I mean? Product market fit isn't something you turn on and off like that.
And I want to talk about the smaller brands because I know we often are referencing some of the larger brands. But we have a good amount of viewership in the smaller brands and the ones not that are at the 0 to 1 category, but the 1 to 5, 5 to 10, right? What are some of the pieces where like if you haven't done this, go do this today? If there are certain points that you would tell them to kind of dig deeper into
for smaller brands? I mean, you got to lean more on qualitative data than you do on quantitative. I think in one of the prior episodes, this was one of a core recommendations we talked on, which is call your customers. I'm a huge fan of that. A number of brands I talked to that are early stage, hey, we've done $50,000 in sales. I mean, that's not that much, right? I mean, you could probably literally call every customer if you're willing to put the time in at that point. But even brands that have done 1 million, 2 million, et cetera, it's like call 100 customers. It will be, I know it feels a little awkward, but just like send them an email and then like, I'll send you free product. Can I just get 10 to 15 minutes of your time? Invaluable. And like, yes, have a script, but this and that. But more of what you're looking for is like the intonations in their voice. Like, hey, of these 3 products, did you like, this new one that we released? Yeah, I liked it. It's like, well, that's very different how you
Yeah.
heard them say that than on an email saying, yeah, I liked it.
Yep.
You see how you can interpret
Yeah, yeah,
those
yeah.
very differently,
Yep,
right? So
100%.
So point being, and then you can start to talk to be like, well, where else do you shop? And maybe you hear the word Walmart come up a lot. Okay,
Yep.
well, that's interesting. And you can learn a lot about your customers, about the site experience, et cetera. Because when you're really small, you hit the nail on the head. You don't have as much statistical significance, and you've got to lean on almost like the finger in the wind theory,
Yes.
right? Which is like, where's the wind coming from,
Always,
right?
yep.
Which is better than nothing, and it's still helpful.
Yep.
And a lot of, for instance, clients that we have that are early stage, what we'll be doing is we're using the best that we can with their data, and we'll make the best decisions we can based not only in the data, but also comparable brands.
Yeah.
So maybe they're an earlier stage, I don't know, nutraceutical brand or fashion brand or whatever. We'll look at some of our other clients who have scaled tremendously that are doing 8-9 figures as an example per year in online sales. And we'll look historically at where they were at the earlier stages to try and come up with some baselines. Like, ooh, you know, your add to cart rate or your cart to checkout rate for this female iOS user should really be here because here's 3 other comparisons and you're by far lower.
Right.
So maybe that is the issue. And that's
Yeah.
that's still a data-driven decision. Yes, I know it's still lacking a lot of statistical confidence in it, but it's better than just being like, okay, well, let's change the hero banner.
Right,
You know what I mean?
right,
And doing
right.
one of those again, or let's run a promotion type
Yep,
thing.
yep.
So you got to lean a lot on qualitative, and you got to just start learning the storyline,
That's right.
So if I come back to that user a year later and I say, who are your customers and what's their story? You should be able to tell me.
That's right.
To be like, well, the average customer will be, you know, a 37 to 55-year-old female. She is married. She has kids. She lives in this level household income range. She's, you know, general, whatever. You can share me some basic demographic details.
Yep.
She's probably going to find us on Instagram, right? She's going to see it generally between the hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., you know, based on where you've seen the spikes or dips in your conversion rate throughout the day on average. And you could say, which means she was probably at work, so she's on break doing it or just taking a moment, whatever it is. Again, I'm making this all up, but like you should be able to tell me this type of storyline a year down the road. She clicks on it. She doesn't buy first purchase. Why? Because she's highly price elastic. So she will then go look over here, which is why we found our affiliates who promote this coupon tend to do really well on last click. And it's like, man, you are dialed in. Like you've really started to understand that storyline of your consumer.
That's right.
So you got to use qualitative data to the best you can and then back it up with some quantitative, which, by the way, the bigger you get, it inverts.
Yeah.
You use quantitative, when you're a bigger brand, you use quantitative data and then you validate that with qualitative. Right.
Right.
So
That's great. That's actually great feedback. I want to take a small moment into going into a little bit more on the data side again.
Yeah.
Because I feel like even when you brought it up to me, I got triggered. And I'm like, how come we didn't think about looking at the data piecemeal in this way?
Yeah.
Are there, you know, we talked about new users and their behaviors a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Can the same be applied in just returning users too? And are there different cohorts or different ways to break up returning users and how to watch their behavior differently than what we're used to, which is just bucketing them as retention?
Yeah, sure. So like again on GA4, you can look at path models and you can look at attribution models. You can compare them, first click versus last click. So you can start to see and paint the picture once again of those people who are going to be repeat visiting to the site. What are the predominant channels they're using? So the classic one is they come originally from paid media, prospective advertisement, and then they come back from direct or Google search. This is why a lot of brands, they may look, and I would challenge people watching this, go look at your GA. There's a strong chance when you look at the direct, the attribution of revenue direct, it'll seem really high.
Yeah, it always
20,
does.
40, 60, 70%. And a lot of times that's nothing more than just a halo effect of paid media or paid search or some prospective advertising.
So is there no real way to track that down further than kind of like, hey, it's probably just this versus like, I guess direct is direct, right? There's no other format you can add to it to kind of track down where this person's coming from.
Originally. Well, you can use the path analyses on GA4 to look at so you can look at an audience set, conversions over the last 100 days or whatever, and you can say, show me a first click attribution model versus last click, and you can see the percentage changes between, right?
Got it, right.
So, but
That's
that won't specifically answer the question, but it helps.
Right,
Because
right.
if all of a sudden you see like direct and organic search have 80% variance, it's like,
That's
wow.
true.
Okay.
Right.
So virtually nobody buys on direct from first visit.
Yep.
But a ton of them buy on multi-visit. We also invest almost all of our ad budget into paid media. Paid media first last click purchase, first visit is only 3% of our revenue. It's like, okay, well, just connect the dots there.
Yeah,
like you can clearly see the storyline coming together, which is, you know, and then they'd be like, so we dropped paid media because we didn't think it was doing as it was doing, and sales fell off a cliff. It's like, okay, so you know that is a driver.
Right.
So what does it mean? Most likely, and this is very common in D2C and e-com, is that people are coming from paid media, coming to your site, and then they're coming back, whether it's later that day, different device, after they've done their own research, after they've gone to a proverbial Walmart or Amazon. And that's normal. And you think about your normal behavior. Browsers are super intelligent, right? So, I mean, I got a Mac right here. My Safari will remember every site. So I just start typing, like Avi. I'll start typing in like MY, and immediately it's like
right
Avi.
there.
So if I was just there on a prospective advertisement, even if I go to Google search, I mean, a lot of folks, for instance, on Safari, and I'm going to digress for a second. A lot of direct is actually organic search. So if you use Safari as an example and you go like, what was that brand called? Obvi something. So I just start typing in Obvi into the search bar. It's intelligent enough. A lot of times it'll get the URL right. When you just hit enter, that's per GA a direct hit.
Oh, wow.
But that was really an organic search.
Yeah.
So now Chrome, if you notice, Chrome doesn't auto-populate the URLs the same way.
That's right.
Why? Because they want you
to hit the Google search.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
so
crazy.
This is why, and now, okay, let's prove or disprove what I just said. Go into your operating system and your browser reports and take a look at the repeat versus new visits on it, and you'll see very different behavior on Safari versus Chrome, which validates or invalidates, like invalidate it, sure, right? That is or is not what's happening with your user base. So once again, it's like all these little data points are there and you can piece your storyline together.
Right.
So unfortunately, yes, we live in a world of attribution. I mean, it's like, there is no really brilliant way to do it, you know? And there's been a lot of tools, the Triple Whales of the world have really helped, absolutely. But at the end of the day, this goes back to that concept we talked about before, which is like the funnel is dead, right? I mean, if people are doing this all over the place.
And you add in retail, Amazon, and all that.
And all this other stuff, And then you add in the fact that they have multiple devices. It's like, bro, you know, that's going to get really, get really hard to track. So you've got to do your best to use what you have to then take that, not necessarily take it for gospel, but it is giving you hints and then piece together the storyline.
Throughout this episode, we've covered a lot of different ways of kind of unwrapping why it's not what it seems, right? But at the end of the day, when you sit back, me as a founder, even right now, I'm like, all right, Ned, so what do I do with all this? Like, what's next? What is my action item? So what's your thoughts there?
So this is in the growth loop, the growth experimentation loop. This is all the analysis part. Now we get into the fun part. Well, I like the analysis part, but now we get into the fun part, which is ideation. So what you should do, and we talked about this before, is great. Now you've got all these data points. Hey team, here's what we found. What does this mean? And then you get stakeholders in the room, ideally a diverse group. You got the C-suite team in there. You've got the marketing folks in there. You've got customer steering committee in there if you really want to be expert at this, right? You got their involvement. You've got people who don't even have much involvement with the brand. Sometimes strangers bring up like really amazing points because they're brand new looking at it. And you say very much like these points, we've got new users. These convert really well, who are first visit, first purchase unit economic. People are multi-visit or not, as an example. Okay, so what do we do? And then people say, well, maybe we could change the price. Okay, that's an idea. Chalk it up on the board. Or we could change how we display this unique selling proposition here. Okay, chalk it up. And then you all come to some cumulative agreement on which one to run first. And here's the key thing. It doesn't matter if the test wins or not. Like, yes, you want wins. You're validating or invalidating hypotheses.
That's right.
That's the key thing. So you've got a null hypothesis that exists now on the site or in the marketing ecosystem. You're challenging it with what's called an alternative hypothesis. If it wins, great, you found something. If it didn't, great, you found that wasn't the thing.
Right.
So it's okay if you lose, but this is really what should happen next. And then this is why I'm big on needing a strong empirical testing culture in your organization, whether you do it internally or use an agency like us as an example. That's the next step in this, is then you get into experimenting and you keep going and going and going, and you will find it eventually. Yes.
I love what you just said about like just a loss is not a loss. It shouldn't even be a win or a loss.
Right.
What it should be is it's a win or a learning.
Correct.
And like, I think the learning sometimes is just as important as the win, because you're learning what it isn't.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think that piece
well
is
said.
not it is not ingrained in founders, and it's not taught to us though. That's the other problem.
Yeah.
We've always been looking at how to improve,
Yeah.
which is synonymous to win, win, win.
Yeah. Yeah.
And improvement can also be finding out what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge piece that, like, I think you as a thought leader, thought expert, and an industry expert in this category probably also have to preach more. And I'm sure you do, right? Which is why you're putting out this material. But it's so important for people to understand.
It is.
that.
And to just prove it, I have a client who does a subscription model for a home decor box. And we've tested this so many times because every time we do it, we're like, I cannot believe, but it's true.
Yeah.
The more, because it's all about, you don't know what's in the box until you subscribe.
Right.
And so a lot of people are like, well, you can't get them to subscribe to this thing and not show them what they're going to get.
Right.
Contraire. Turns out just the opposite.
Yeah.
Every single time we've tested this, the more you show the contents in the box to the non-subscribers, the lower the conversion rate to subscription.
Crazy. It's crazy.
And again, it's one of those things where it's like, we really disproved this theory that we thought, which was more was better. It's not the case with them. And for them specifically, it's not the case. Their consumer base loves the mystery factor, I guess, of what it is, right? We even tested showing historical boxes, and that didn't convert well. Wow. It was really fascinating, right? So again, how key is that to unlock that learning? And that for them has rang true with, it's like we talk about it all the time, emails, marketing campaigns, all sorts of out-of-home stuff that they do. It's like, well, remember, people don't want to know what's actually in the box. Like,
That's
we've
right.
learned that. So to your point, the learning in that case was more valuable than what would have been a win that drove them another 20 grand a month.
That's so
2
true.
years ago, you know?
Well said. You gave a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
We went, like, I think super detailed, and and I think a lot of great takeaways. But staying on theme of what we do at Chew On CRO, if you had to give the watchers and listeners one thing to chew on, what's that takeaway?
So let's use your surface level data as nothing more than an opportunity to ask a question. That would be the first one, right? So to your point earlier, dashboards, these surface level, large scale, just like here's your conversion rate, that's there just so you can ask questions, right?
Don't make an action step after that.
What's going right? What's going wrong, right? The second aspect I would say that's a core bite to chew on is learn how to dissect with a scalpel. Meaning learn how to get into these hyper granular metrics because they will tell you a fascinating story on what's going on. And that will spawn ideation that's better. Better ideation leads to better experimentation. Better experimentation leads to better growth.
Chew on that.
If you want more from us, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, follow us on TikTok, and check out the website chewonthis.io.